No one ever told me that PMS had personality types, and I'm guessing no one ever told you either. While you're not going to find these types in a textbook or as an official medical diagnosis, if you've ever tracked your cycle, you're going to know exactly what I mean. After years of working with women on their physical, mental, and hormonal health, I've seen very common patterns over and over again. Clear symptom types tied to very common root causes, and yes, even personality tendencies that seem to go along with the territory. Hi, I'm Jess. I'm a functional nutritionist, and in today's video, I'm going to share the 5 personality types that I see most commonly in women who really struggle with PMS and PMDD. And I actually put together a super awesome quiz that goes along with these types, so I'll be sharing a little bit more information on how to get access to that resource in a little bit. But before we start, I do want to give a disclaimer that while I'm going to be sharing my personal clinical experience as well as some common strategies for each one of these types, this is not personalized medical advice. This is really meant to be a helpful framework to understand symptom patterns and potentially help you connect the dots for your own cycle and your health journey. So let's get into it. All right, type number 1 is the pain fighter. These women really struggle with cramping and inflammation, especially in the days leading up to their period. From a root cause perspective, this is often linked to what is called prostaglandin imbalances, which essentially increase inflammation and then cause painful uterine contractions. This can be a common pattern that you see with women with endometriosis, where the pain becomes more intense and consistent over time. Now here's where the personality layer comes in. The pain fighter is someone who pushes through no matter what. They'll go to work, care for others, maybe even try to hit the gym, even when they are in incredible physical pain. Probably because the pain fighter has a really high pain threshold because they've gotten used to this. But this type often delays asking for help. They can be perfectionists or kind of have that type A tendency where they're just going to push through. So let's talk about my number 1 recommendation for the pain fighter. What I usually recommend for patients and clients in this category is really focusing on reducing inflammation. And while that can sound pretty generic, the number 1 pathway that I think is helpful to focus on is increasing your omega-3 fatty acid consumption. So omega-3 fatty acids that are essential and found in seafood, but also a fish oil supplement, is going to help shift the prostaglandin production to anti-inflammatory prostaglandin formation, and that's going to help reduce that uterine cramping, contraction, and pain. So this is a really simple but powerful first step for the pain fighter. All right, type 2 is the mood cycler. The mood cycler really struggles with depression, mood swings, and overall emotional dysregulation, especially in the second half of their cycle. These women experience extreme mood shifts across their cycle, meaning that they might go from feeling optimistic, energized, and very productive earlier in the month, only to crash into irritability, sadness, hopelessness, or total emotional overwhelm in the luteal phase. From a root cause perspective, this is often tied to fluctuations in neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, as well as heightened sensitivity to shifting progesterone and cortisol levels in that second phase of the cycle. These women are incredibly self-aware. They know something changes dramatically every single month. They've often spent hours researching supplements, diets, lifestyle changes to stabilize their mood. They're what I affectionately call my biohacker personalities, constantly tracking, testing, and trying to figure everything out. While this type can be a little bit more complex, my number 1 recommendation for this type is to focus on neurotransmitter balance. There are a variety of nutrients that help with this, and I talk about a lot of them on my channel, but one really good example is vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 plays a critical role in the production of neurotransmitters, and yet it's pretty easy to be deficient in this particular nutrient. If you really relate to this type where you feel like one person one half of your cycle and a completely different person the next, it may be worth watching some of my videos on PMDD and the root causes behind that. I will link that video directly below. All right, the third personality type is what I call the Estro-Carrier. These are women who feel incredibly weighed down, both physically and emotionally, in the second half of their cycle. So if you're an Estro-Carrier, you might experience things like bloating, water retention, breast tenderness, generally feeling just puffy leading up to your period. From a clinical perspective, I see this pattern frequently in women who have signs of estrogen dominance, which is a pattern where your estrogen compared to your other hormones isn't quite balanced, or you're not clearing out your estrogen effectively. Interestingly, I've also found that estrogen dominance can be tied to histamine reactivity as well. So this could be things like having more food sensitivities, headaches, or just feeling extra inflamed and reactive. But let's talk about the personality patterns that I often see with Estro-Carriers. So Estro-Carriers are natural caretakers. They give so much to others. They rarely take time to focus on themselves, and they can be people pleasers who hold on to everything from emotions to responsibilities to even that physical water retention and inflammation. I feel like these women carry the weight of the world, and they feel very weighed down physically and emotionally. For women in this category, the number one nutritional component I recommend is focusing on estrogen metabolism. One of the easiest and first steps in doing this is increasing your intake of cruciferous vegetables. So cruciferous vegetables are things like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, did I miss one? Brussels sprouts. So all of these foods contain a compound called DIM, and this helps support your body's natural detoxification pathways and assists in clearing estrogen more efficiently. All right, the fourth personality type is the fatigued overachiever. These are women who run at full speed until their entire body totally crashes in the luteal phase, or maybe it's just a few days before their period. They often experience chronic fatigue, low energy, achy or heavy limbs, poor recovery after exercise, and basically just feeling like no amount of sleep that they get is enough. From a clinical perspective, this is often tied back to adrenal dysfunction as well as cortisol imbalances. Basically, the body has been in go mode for so long that they just can't keep up with the stress load at some point. So similarly to the pain fighter, but a little bit different, the fatigued overachiever is the classic type A, high achiever, do-it-all woman. The thing about fatigued overachievers, though, is that they tend to overcommit, underrest, and feel guilty for even thinking about slowing down. They're driven, ambitious, super capable, but sometimes at the expense of their own energy and well-being. For women in this category, my number one recommendation is to support the body's stress response. A very popular way to do this is with something called adaptogens. Adaptogens are herbs that help the body adapt to stress and bring the nervous system back into balance. They work by supporting the adrenals and HPA axis, promoting a more stable energy throughout the day. Two of my go-to adaptogens are rhodiola and holy basil. So rhodiola can be helpful for women if their energy is completely tanked because it can be a little bit stimulating, whereas tulsi, also known as holy basil, is a gentler support for overall stress resilience. It is very important, though, to be aware that adaptogens do have a lot of interactions with medications and even nutrients. So you definitely want to check with your provider, and you definitely want to check any drug supplement interactions before taking any adaptogen. All right, PMS type 5 is what I call the anxious sensor. These are women who feel hyper alert, restless, jittery, or like they can never quite calm down in their premenstrual window. They can experience anxiety, panic attacks, racing thoughts, even rapid heartbeats, insomnia, and just a sense of being on the edge for no psychological reason. From a root cause perspective, I do see that this is commonly linked to nervous system regulation and poor stress recovery, but it can often be influenced as well by fluctuating cortisol and progesterone levels too. So this personality type, you might be familiar with the term HSP, which is highly sensitive people. And these are women who are very in tune with their bodies and surrounding. This can be a really, really beautiful thing, but it also makes these individuals more prone to sensory overload and feeling things really deeply, whether that's physically, emotionally, or energetically as well. While this personality type does really need to focus on calming the nervous system and would likely also benefit from some of the stress support we talked about in the last type, the number one nutritional factor that I look at, which might seem basic, but if it hasn't been looked at, it's very, very important, and that is magnesium intake. Magnesium plays a key role in GABA production, which is your body's calming and inhibitory neurotransmitter that makes you feel calm and at peace. It's also important to note that women with low progesterone levels often experience more anxiety in the luteal phase, and magnesium helps support good progesterone levels as well. If you tried magnesium and it hasn't really seemed to make a difference, it's important to note that the type and the dose does really matter when it comes to this personality type. There are other strategies for the anxious sensor as well, but they're a little bit more advanced. So if you're interested in that, then I recommend checking out my program, the Mood Balance Method, where I have pretty in-depth protocols for this type as well as the other ones that we've gone over. So I'm curious to know if you see yourself in one of these types primarily, or maybe you see yourself in a few of them. It's very possible to have a combination. For example, it's very common to see extreme fatigue in addition to some of the other patterns that we talked about. But just like with other personality archetypes where you might be, say, 70% of one thing and 30% of the other, I encourage you to think about the PMS personality types in this way. Meaning you're likely going to have one predominant type, but then maybe a subtype or secondary pattern as well. That being said, it's your predominant pattern that you're going to benefit the most from focusing on initially. Like I mentioned earlier, I did put together a quiz that goes along with these personality types. It's going to be the first link in the description of this video. It's super fun. It's less than 10 questions, and it's basically a combination of your physical symptoms, how you feel emotionally, and what you feel like your biggest pain points are that help identify your predominant type. And if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to give it a like and maybe share it with someone who would potentially benefit from this as well. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.